So let's talk about our two guests today. First of all, we have Arthur Jafa. Arthur is a Los Angeles-based filmmaker, cinematographer, and visual artist who has produced in a wide array of disciplines, from his cinematic work on films such as Julie Dash's Daughters of the Dust, Spike Lee's Crooklyn, and Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut, to his recent Untitled exhibition of collected images at the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles. His groundbreaking video collage, the stunning Love is the Message is Death, is a collection of iconic images set to the soundtrack of music by Kanye West, depicting a visualization of modern black life that is both beautiful and haunting. The video is currently showing here in Detroit, courtesy of MOCAD, at 1086 Bellevue until October 22nd. The screening room is open today until 5 p.m. And also we have a catalog of Arthur's stuff also available right now in our store, so please be sure to check that out. Greg Tate is a writer, musician, and cultural provocateur who lives on Harlem's Sugar Hill, and whose books include Flyboy and the Buttermilk from 1992, Everything But the Burden, What White People Are Taking from Black Culture from 2004. His most recent is Flyboy 2, The Greg Tate Reader, released via Duke University Press in 2016. Tate has also led the conducted improv big band Burnt Sugar, the Orchestra Chamber, since 1999, and is a proud member of Howard University's Bison Nation. He has formerly taught at Yale, Columbia, Brown, and Williams colleges and universities. This fall, he will begin teaching a class at Princeton called The Loud and Proud Musicology of Amiri Baraka. Ladies and gentlemen, Arthur Jafa and Greg Tate.
Welcome, Detroit. Thanks for having us. It's good to be back at MOCAD. The band has played here. My band, Burnt Sugar, has played here about four times, and we always feel embraced in the space and in the city. There's a lot of interpersonal connection to Detroit. Some good friends. Actually, the first friend I made in New York when I moved from D.C. is here, Sharon Pryor, and her mom, Dale Pryor, and then a lot of Detroiters came through New York, in the 80s and 90s, just became real tight personal friends and kind of brought us into the loop of black Detroitness, So, we feel like deputized defenders of the D in New York City. And Arthur and I have known each other since, I can't even remember when we did know each other. Yeah, but we met at Howard. And as you can imagine, we've been in conversation ever since, publicly, privately, formally, informally. And, we've had a few occasions to talk about his current work. And we always try to mix it up, try to have the conversation go in places that we haven't gone before, just so we're not regurgitating some of the same rigmarole. So I told him last night, I said, you know what, why don't we talk about Detroit in Detroit? Talk about, and specifically in relationship to his work, why it's been important, to your own development, why phenomena that's emerged from Detroit musically, artistically, has mattered so much to the projects you're involved in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello, can you guys hear me? Hello? Okay. Well, we've already gone somewhere we've never gone before, because I don't think I've ever heard you refer to me as Arthur.
Uh-huh.
Maybe it's just
I've been influenced by outside instigators,
I'm happy to be here. Like Greg said, we have a long history with Detroit. A good friend of mine, I don't know if he's here, Chris Alexander. He'd probably show up. But he always says, I have superpowers here. Yeah. I'm glad to be here. Really, really happy, that Love is a Message in particular is showing here. When Gavin first mentioned the whole possibility of showing it here, maybe, I don't know, it was a while ago, it was back in February. I was like, yeah, definitely, let's do it.
Right.
I was really happy with the turnout the other night, people came out to see it. It's going to be up for a month, so definitely tell people to go and check it out. My experience with it has been that people do return viewings of it. So hopefully folks will go see it, tell other people to come see it, and and create their own relationship with it. But so having said that, I'm gonna start off just with a video.
Okay.
Just to get a start. I'm almost licking it as it is. I'm like real close. Like I'm afraid I'm gonna get some if I get any closer.
See, the real deal in this room.
The room is boomy, is what it is.
Well, but the real deal is like for it to be audible, y'all have to sweat. So they'd have to kill the fans.
Yeah, the fans, but yeah.
So we'd be more audible if there was less fan, but y'all have to be ready to just be dripping by the time you get out of here.
Because I'm afraid I'm gonna get some if I get any closer to it. But I'm gonna start off showing something. I mean, one of my big things is let's see how we tie this with Detroit. I mean, the thing about Detroit, it was like, if you have friends from Detroit and something comes up, they be like, "Don't do that. I'm from Detroit." You know what I mean? Everybody's had that experience, and it's just something about the idea of Detroit as being real, right? And I think that's complicated. Like, what does the real mean? I have an increasingly super ambivalent relationship to this whole idea of the real. I mean, I'm one of the few people who can say I come from somewhere that's even realer than Detroit, and that's like the Mississippi Delta. Uber real, proto real. But Detroit, of course, is a very special environment. I mean, it's like the only place, like, if you just start making a list of people who come out of here, it's just inexplicable. I told somebody I'm sure like several hundred years from now, they're going to dig up Detroit and there's going to be a comet or something, buried beneath the city as an explanation for all the mutant creativity and expressivity that's come out of this, one footprint. Like, it's kind of...
one thing I was thinking about, too, was just that, there's the culture that developed here, but then there are people who definitely, they had the deepest impact, I would say, in the culture first here. Sun Ra, I think an artist from Chicago, Parliament Funkadelic.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
I mean, but that's what I'm saying. Like, it's just
Prince,
yeah,
craft
exactly.
work.
No, it's just been it's also a weird. It's not just an incubator for like just mutant creativity. It's also been a repository for it as well, because I've just heard so many crazy stories by Prince. I mean, Detroit is an early adopter. You could make a movie just by Prince in Detroit, and not even Prince, just the shit that happened around Prince coming to Detroit. I've heard like incredible stories of Prince performing and Young Boys Incorporated rolling in that just seem mythic and epic, So, so this is a very, very unique place. I'm really partial to it, like I said, because I feel like as we get into the 21st century and we start to, start seeing like what's happening with culture and stuff, it's increasingly difficult to find places where the black aesthetic or the black vibe is still strong and still not like static. And that's the thing about it. It's not static, but it's like really, really strong. I got into a conversation with some people the other day about Magic City in Atlanta, and they were very like kind of, it's a strip joint, and they were very kind of amazed or something that I was into Magic City. And I was like, well, yeah, because Magic City is a repository of black values, for better or for worse. And they said, yeah, but what about the kind of, misogyny or patriarchy or sexism? And I was just like, where you? There ain't nowhere that stuff doesn't saturate everything. And we started crossing off the list, things that are worthy of inquiry and consideration. The presence of sexism, 99% of everything out here is going to get scratched off the list, So it's not to say not to be cognizant or critical of it or anything like that. But by the same time, I think it's a space where there's so much rich, complex, like I said, evolving black cultural expression going on. And I like to think that Detroit is a very particular place in that respect too. I mean, the first person who ever said I was their favorite filmmaker is here in Detroit. I was just thinking about it the other day. I won't mention their name because I don't want to embarrass them. But somebody just told me, she said, AJ is my favorite filmmaker. And nobody had ever said that. This was like maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And I was like, I wasn't even sure I was a filmmaker. You know what I mean? So, anyway.
No, but I've heard you talk in terms of black cinema as a project. As a kind of Uber project. You've been involved with all your life in a meta project. But I've heard you talk a lot about it being in a kind of constant state of underdevelopment relative to these other places, other disciplines in the culture. And I know that you talk about the need for what you call sustainable models of development.
Right.
So I know there are a few things that happen here.
Oh yeah.
Very strong reference for you. Yeah.
I mean, like most people who know, who have followed or familiar with my thinking around these things, just knows that, along with a really good partner of mine and a more recent partner of mine, Malik Saeed and Elisa Blount Moorhead, we formed a film entity. It goes back and forth. Sometimes people call it a collective. I don't really think of it as a collective myself, just because I have some problems with some baggage around it being called a collective. I think of it as a company, but the way I've always described it is like, it's a film company model on Motown, because everybody I think can get the genius of what Motown did, because I do think the primary problem with black cinema, well, two primary problems. One is like a problem of aesthetics, like what it is that people are actually actively trying to do or accomplish. But the primary problem, pragmatic problem, of course, is infrastructure, just support, a structure that allows people to actually create films. Film is a complicated medium because it involves a lot of different parts. It's not, I think like one of the genius moves of techno is that the equipment got to a point where a person could literally sit on the side of their bed and make the thing. Well, film, heretofore, this moment, that really wasn't possible. You really needed a kind of complex infrastructure to get it done with a lot of people who did a lot of different things working in conjunction, which is why film typically is really capital intensive or foreign. But the thing that I thought that was really great about understanding what Barry Gordy did with Motown was like, people take for granted that R&B was an industry the way it's an industry now, as opposed to R&B, which is an art form, but it wasn't necessarily an industry. Nobody really turned it into an industry. And what Barry Gordy did, and it's a simple move in hindsight, you look back at it, it's super simple. Say, oh yeah, that's obvious. Like he basically took the Henry Ford model and applied it to the production of R&B. And that really does simplify it because, it's like Jackson Pollock or something. Oh yeah, I'm just gonna sling painting on the canvas while I'm listening to jazz records over and over. It's simple after you do it, but it's not really simple, that leap, that conceptual leap to do it. So I recognized pretty early on that Motown, in terms of black culture, one of the only secular institutions that we have that we can point to enough that we can study it and debate it and talk about. It's not a perfect model, but in terms of what it is about black cinema that I think needs to be addressed, Motown was a perfect model, meaning like basically you want to set up a situation where you have house bands and you have technical support and you have an internal culture, that's putting forth a particular vision of excellence, and they have certain, internal mechanisms to ensure and to force that excellence to come to the top. Everybody knows about the whole Motown thing of like you would do a record and then everybody had to review the record and they voted on it, internally, or having not just a house band, which was like jazz guys who really were way overqualified. They were virtuosos, overqualified to actually play the music they were being asked to play. But then you have the combination of that virtuosic technical excellence from the house bands, but then you have people coming from neighborhoods with these melodic ideas, with these lyrical ideas that weren't per se trained. And I always think a big part of like when you hear any classic Motown tune, a big part of why it even sounds exciting now is that combination of order and chaos, like refinement and just loose wildness, So
which goes back to New Orleans jazz.
It totally goes back to that. Yeah. So my thing is like really has been like, how do we formulate structures that allow us to get at these things. And so, like, TNEG is the part that's really trying to think about what that would look like structurally. And then on the other hand, like most people know me, I've been very much an evangelist for this whole idea that black cinema, has to be aware of Hollywood as a point of reference, but it's got to adopt and embrace a more complicated range of models of things that it could be, both cinematic and non-cinematic. Ideally first with the music. That's my mantra, or our mantra. Like, how do you make cinema with the beauty, alienation, and complexity of black music? So that's one thing. But also, like, inside of cinema, like, what other kinds of things can we look at as a point of reference? Because there's nothing that in and of itself is dope. I don't think so. Things are dope in relationship to culture and how people read those things. So, so a lot of the work that I've been doing, in particular recently in Loving as a Message, really has a lot to do with going to source material that's not professional source material per se. It's not, citizen videos of, police malevolence and just all kinds of other things too. So I mean, maybe can I show something? I just want to show a little something.
Yes, you can.
Yes, I can.
I was thinking, Toni Morrison says she writes novels that she wants to read but cannot find. And I know that this particular sequence of images has a relationship to a particular epic story, film you want to make. But I also know when I look at that assemblage of avatars and terrors and horrors and anti-heroes, that it also speaks to a black cinema you want to see, but cannot find too, and we'll just talk about your collection, the way you collect images and how it relates to trying to compensate for, the underdevelopment you see in what we call black cinema now, or black filmmaking now, or historically black movie making.
Right. I think, David Hickey, he said it best to me. He said, music was the dominant cultural form of the 20th century. But the only other form that you could maybe debate that would be cinema, in a sense. And but for some of the reasons I was pointing out earlier, it's like cinema is just a really expensive medium, even though black people engage in cinema from the very beginning. Like the Louis Armstrong of cinema, Oscar Micheaux, was making films. His first film was like 1918. So black folks have been in the game of cinema for a long time, but it's just the particularity of the form itself, and like I said, the capital-intensive nature of it means that even though people are in the game, there hasn't been a whole lot of space to play. And like I've pointed out before, it's like if you look at, to a certain degree, once you get past Oscar Micheaux, who made films from 1918 to 1948, I think, and made over 36 feature films, and Spencer Williams and a few other people, once you get past them, to a certain degree, cinema is a history of like one-offs, like great one-offs, I would say. It's just a litany of people who you could just say like their first film was the greatest film, and they never really kind of came within striking distance of why that was great. I would put on that list everybody from Melvin Van Peebles, who did Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song, to Charles Burnett, who did Killer Sheep, who's made a lot of interesting films, but most people would say Killer Sheep is by far his masterpiece. I would include Julie in that, of course, Daughters of the Dust. But it's
Bill Gunn,
Ganja and Hess. It's just a whole bunch of instances where people clearly displayed genius, but they weren't able to actually follow it up. And so that question of following it up is the question, like how come it's one-offs? I used to sometimes say about Julie, she was like Toni Morrison if she published The Bluest Eye and was never able to publish another book, So if Daughters of the Dust, which is quite an achievement, it's her first feature film, if that's her Bluest Eye, like what would her Song of Solomon or Beloved, we have no idea what that would look like if she got to make 4, 5, 6 films. Not just making films, but making the films that she wanted to make.
Right.
So the space in which I think that I've operated in has always been a space that has acknowledged a certain kind of, if not deprivation, you know, underdevelopment. It just seems like it's a fundamental part of what we've done. And maybe to a certain degree, it's also true of the music, but it just looks very different in that medium, you know, this underdevelopment and how it shapes our aesthetic and how it shapes our values on what's worth pursuing, what's not worth pursuing. So a big part of one of the things that I've always done is I've just always collected images since I was a kid, as you know, right? And it's very OCD.
Yesterday you dropped something that I hadn't heard before about the Kung Fu.
Oh, the Kung Fu. Yeah, because I have this film called Dreams of Cold and Death, and I was doing a Q&A with Amy Tallman after the screening, and she said, "Oh, yeah, most people know like you've been doing these books for forever. You had these picture books for forever, and that in those books, you know, people used to wonder, well, how is this going to translate? How would this particular vision like translate to film?" And she thought in that film you saw it. And my dad stood up and said, well, he's been doing a version of these since he was like a kid. Like, and it's true. And I was saying last night that when I was in the 7th grade, I had a book that was like literally like thousands of Kung Fu ads. You know, it was Bruce Lee, you know, 5 Fingers of Death. I was really caught up in that at the moment. So I just had all these images of just Kung Fu ads, right? So, and a lot of that was really driven also by this whole sense of lack, because I can remember the first Kung Fu ad I ever saw, like trailer. I mean, it had such an indelible impact on me that I can literally remember where I was spatially. It showed Saturday morning after American Bandstand and before the local like horror film that would come on Saturdays.
That's a
and
real
it was
yeah.
It was in my aunt Ned Ann's house that Saturday, and I was just sitting in her living room, and this ad for 5 Fingers of Death came on. And I had never seen anything like that, because it was like, I mean, I guess it was the effect that people had when they first saw The Matrix with like the bullet time and all this kind of stuff. Because you had people fighting, running around, they were flying over the ceiling and crashing into each other in the sky. I mean, outside of comic books, I just had never experienced anything like that. So I went on a jag, you know what I mean? Like a lot of people in America, like 5 Fingers of the Death sort of preceded like Chinese Connection and Fists of Fury and these kinds of things to the state. But like, that was the beginning of where everybody was going, because Bruce Lee, I mean, a really central figure. I mean, he's up there with like Muhammad Ali in a lot of ways, like iconically, the way people dealt with, I mean, black folks recognized that Bruce Lee was a brother from the beginning, just in terms of his style, his swag. Because I can remember, like, I'm gonna tell you the other thing about, it's a little bit, I'm going on a crazy tangent now, but like by Bruce Lee, that's really deep. Like anybody who's my age, like I was born in the 1960s, I think it's like 66, 67, Batman was on there, the television show. Which, you know, like anybody American kid who grew up on comic books and stuff, I was in the Batman. I was like young enough where I didn't see the sort of camp of it, you know, how sarcastic it was. But I was just into Batman. And then because Batman was so successful, they came out, of course, with the Green Hornet. And this is the thing about the Green Hornet. Nobody cared about the Green Hornet. Everybody was like, who the hell is that dude driving the car? Who the hell is Kato? I mean, it was just his swag, his charisma, like everything. It was just like, dang, who is that? So like where I was from, everybody was like, fuck a Green Hornet, man. Kato was one. He wore all black, his style, everything. And then he just disappeared. The show got canceled, and there was no more Kato. And that's like 67, then 71, 72, Fist of Fury. Damn, that is Kato. You know what I mean? Kicking ass. Like, I mean, he made a move that was very similar to Jimi Hendrix's move. Like Hendrix had to leave here. He had to leave here. He went to London to get his thing off.
Well, you know, it's interesting too, because you know the show Kung Fu. He auditioned for it, and they told him that he wasn't Chinese enough for it. But I think, but when you think about it, see, that relates to what you're saying about. See, they saw all that brother up in him too. Right?
Totally. I mean, Bruce Lee's last film is Game of Death with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Like, even for me, like, I mean, I didn't too much like the fact that he kicked Jabbar's ass in it, but I still appreciated that Jabbar's...
Too much iconic dissonance.
Like, oh, man, it's like, like even now, just recently, you know this fashion line, Fear God, that's Jerry Lorenzo. Like his whole new thing he's come out fashion-wise totally based on Bruce Lee's, that get-up. Like he had this jumpsuit on in Game of Death, the yellow jumpsuit with the black stripes. And that's what Jerry Lorenzo just done, like Kendrick Lamar just wore it, you know?
Right.
And it's just like super, super iconic, man.
Well, you know, we also know that Bruce Lee partly grew up in the same neighborhood that Jimi Hendrix did in Seattle.
Yeah, exactly.
Went to the same high school a few years
That's
apart.
another place, like I'm sure there's a comment.
But you know what's deep too, like, just for the astrologically minded in the audience, Jimi Hendrix and Bruce Lee had the same birthday, which in the Book of Days in astrology is known as the day of electrifying excitement. So,
Totally.
So anybody that questions, you know, like the accuracy of astrology, deal with that. You know.
I mean, look, I had the poster, the Game of Death poster, and the poster is still one of, I mean, honestly, I'm just gonna blow it up. I'm gonna blow it up and put it in the art gallery because it's just a great piece. It's just Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, like the character he played, he had this powder blue kind of caftan or something, but it was like too short. It came ballad to his waist, and he had these underwear on, these white underwear, right? And he had the shades on. It was like totally a Black Panther, right? Because it was straight up like Eldridge Cleaver.
Yeah.
Black, Ray-Bans, Afro, 7'2", right? And in the shot, he's kicking at Bruce Lee. He's on one side of the frame, and his leg extends to the whole other side of the frame, and Bruce Lee is under his leg like this. Some bad shit, man. I'm sorry. You know, and even when I saw the movie, like I said, even though he beat Bruce Lee, the way they explained it was like he had some kind of eye condition. So, you know, Bruce Lee pulled all the curtains off, and he couldn't see. You know what I mean? That's anyway, it was some dope stuff. But, I mean, it's like so much of it for me really just comes down to, I mean, I sort of went off the tangent of the picture collecting, but it just comes down to, like, energy, man, just like energy. Like what is that energy? What is that charisma? And how come, like, you know, you've heard me say this before, like even if you look at the history of cinema, Hollywood cinema, the golden age of Hollywood cinema, like Hollywood does not have that energy anymore.
No.
They don't, their shit is dead. It just ain't no question. That's why they're making comic book movies. I mean, nothing's wrong with comic book. I like the Avengers. I grew up on it like everybody else. Jack Kirby, exactly, the great genius of comic books. But they're mining that now because they just like ideas. But if you look at classic Hollywood cinema, even if you look at it now, even the movie stars, the Marilyn Monroes, the James Deans, the Jimmy Stewarts, those people had so much charisma, like in a way, you can see it. And a lot of that, I think, you know, there's this really incredible book by Neil Gabler called How the Jews Created Hollywood. It's a really, really amazing book because all the original, like, Hollywood studio executives were Jewish entrepreneurs. Most of them were Jewish entrepreneurs.
They come out of Yiddish theater in New York.
Yeah, exactly. And they also came out of, they had this money with them. They brought this money that because of anti-Semitism, they wouldn't let them invest in all the older, more established industries.
Right.
So they ended up putting a lot of money into the movie thing. But I always said, like Neil Gabler, he has a very interesting, when he talks about certain things about it, he pushes right up on it, like this sort of insight that I think is critical to understand about Hollywood. Basically, he's saying, like, all the producers, many of the actors and stuff were Jewish. Most of the writers, a lot of the writers, most of them were Jewish, right? The intensity of whiteness, like the vision that they created of whiteness in Hollywood cinema, and the reason they had so much power in the world and charisma is because the people who were making that vision were not white themselves.
Right.
So their relationship to whiteness, it was almost like a drag king's relationship to femininity. Like it's a hyperbolic, steroided, super version of black female, you know, femininity in the same way that whiteness that got constructed in Hollywood was created by people who were themselves outside of it. And so there's a tacit...
Joe Simon, Joe Schuster.
Yeah, it's
taking
the
the
same thing with
celluloid,
Superman. Exactly.
Yeah,
It's the same exact thing over and over again. So whatever that is, that charisma, that power and stuff, whatever the equation that made that possible seems not to be, not generating that anymore. I mean, it's really interesting, like so many of the most successful directors in the history of cinema are Jewish, right? But like they don't make films about Jewish people. Like arguably the most successful filmmaker ever Steven Spielberg. I mean, if you do some kind of equation of combination of ticket sales and some sort of critical acknowledgement, I mean, like, he made so many films before he ever made a film about Jewish people. That was Schindler's List. And the hero of the film is the German guy.
Right.
You know, like, I think that's very telling about how complicated the whole relationship is. So that's also another reason why people say, well, how come black people just don't go to Hollywood, right? How come, you know, we've proven we can make great films. We've proven we can make money. The whole black exploitation period arguably saved Hollywood.
Right.
You know, economically saved Hollywood in the early 70s. So how come black people haven't been able to find a foothold in Hollywood? And I fundamentally think it's because of this, because that core tacit agreement between larger white society and Jewish people says, you can make movies, but you got to make movies about us. It's a very delicate balance that's in place, right? And when black people show up, no, they're not trying to have us fuck their shit up, man. They know, like, we don't, for better or for worse, we do not operate inside of the rules. We want to break the rules. So it means that it's like trying to jump through a hoop, but the hoop you're jumping through it's a hoop behind it. It's like two hoops going like that. So you're trying to serve, in a sense, multiple masters. I think that's why socially it's been so difficult for black people to actually find some actual, ground in Hollywood, which is why I think the future of black cinema is definitely independent. Even though you may land in Hollywood as a marketplace, the only future for us going forward is to create structures that allow us to dictate the narratives we want to tell and how we want to tell them. And that's only going to happen outside, which is, again, why Detroit becomes interesting, not only in terms of Motown, but in terms of techno, the way people just operated outside of, like, some kind of, the mainstream, I guess, in a sense. And still have changed, altered world culture, musical culture.
Right. Yeah. So is there something else you want to show?
I don't know. Did we get the what subs working? Maybe.
Got to have bass.
Yeah. I mean, that was interesting seeing Apex like that, where it was all trebly. I guess it was a little like, David Bowie produced Raw Power, like the Stooges record. And there's been a lot of debate about that record for years because the way Bowie mixed it, it's like super thin, And like 30 years later, I think Iggy remixed it or something. He said it was never supposed to sound like that.
Right.
But everybody just rejected that because everybody got so used to hearing some of the trebliness attributed to the manic intensity of that particular record. But so that was interesting seeing it like that, but I don't want to see it like that no more.
And accumulate that aura.
What now?
I said it had a long time to become a classic and accumulate the aura.
And just for people's ears to get used to
it.
Yeah, just ears getting used to it. So, are we good?
Yeah. Well, let me, while we wait, talk about, because the soundtrack was, for that piece was Robert Hood.
Yeah, Robert
Detroit
Hood.
Techno. And you said something yesterday about how you really felt about techno's relationship to jazz.
Oh, yeah. What I was saying was, like, I was saying that increasingly I find myself, when I go to a soundtrack, I feel like I'm cheating a little bit, but I go to techno as a soundtrack. And I think the reason why that is increasingly is because if you look at black instrumental music, I think a lot of the virtuosity of what that is in that space of techno or house or this kind of club music. I mean, not that the voice is not present in it, but you know what I mean? It's not like pop music where lyrics really do drive everything and everything's following the lyrics. Like, even with Migos or something like that, it's like the virtuosity is in the wordplay and how it activates those fairly, loopy kind of structures and stuff. But like when you hear techno or something, you really are hearing, like, I think the most advanced construction of purely instrumental music that's going on. I think, and if you go back to his, like Get Up With It, like you hear techno on Get Up. Like
Miles
is Rated X.
Calypso for Limo,
Calypso for Limo, all those songs, that's like techno. That's, to me, that's the earliest versions of techno as we understand it now.
Right.
So increasingly, that's the music that I've been gravitating towards as the appropriate accompaniment for, because as soon as you put lyrics in anything, or voice even in anything, it starts to shape how you're understanding what you're seeing, and so that's something I kind of
also
to avoid.
Just talk about maybe the relationship between the kind of polyrhythmic play you hear in techno and the way you edit, the way you sequence and kind of tweak sequences of imagery?
Well, I think I am, to a certain degree, interested in things being in sync and things being out of sync. I mean, it's like, really, it all comes down to a play of that. Like with Apex that you guys just saw, like a lot of times people experience the images as moving around in a certain kind of way. They say, oh, you altering the sound, but it's not. It's like most of what's happening is the images are on a very rigid, it's like super rigid, like the timing on the images. But because the music is moving around in certain ways, especially with that pulse, it creates this tension. It's like the same, it's like the classic thing. They say like, Giorgio Moroder, that's great, but it's like the disco thing and why it fatigued people's ears because it was just on the beat. But we know from jazz or all black music, James Jamerson, all this, like, it's never right on the beat.
It's got that slippage.
It's got the slippage. Yeah. It's either a little ahead or a little after, and that creates, on a neurological level, all these kinds of undertones and stuff. So basically what I've attempted to do is to extend that relationship between a consistent pulse and another kind of sonic thing. I would try to extend that kind of relationship between the picture and the sound. Yep. In something like Love Is a Message, you have that happening in conjunction with the lyrics, like operating on multiple planes, because there's a certain sonic part that's just about the song in relationship to how the music's tracked. Because Love Is a Message, even though it's got a lot of clips in it, it's not that fast. That's what people think it's rapid fire, but it's not really rapid fire. So it's just, it's just another thing that I think in terms of, like, last night we were up in Pittsburgh and we were talking, and I got kind of interrogated by some people about my sense of time. And I'm kind of resistant to have certain kinds of conversations about time, because I do feel like people's eyes glaze over when I go there, it seemed like, it was like people were saying last night they thought I was avoiding being specific or something, but I just felt like I was sparing people. You know what I mean? Going up the rabbit hole with me. Just the shortest version of it goes something like this. It's like, in the equation of what is black cinema, when I talk about the aesthetic part of it, which is different from all the sort of structural part of it that has to be addressed. In the aesthetic part of it, if you use music as a model, then the first thing you got to say is, like, the unifying strand in African musics, if not black musics in the world, is a certain acute sensitivity to rhythmic complexity. And I even think most people will acknowledge black people in particular neurologically display an acute sensitivity to rhythmic complexity.
And flow.
Yeah, and flow. Like, you can see that. Like, I worked on music videos for a long time, and it's like an undeniable phenomenon that you would see. Like, if you go on a hip-hop music video, and, everything is like, a pre-recorded track, and everybody's sort of dancing to it. So you have extras. You got the leads, but you got extras. Infallibly, if you play that music, everybody's on the one. Like, immediately.
Right.
Immediately. If you go to a rock shoot, it's like crazy. Like, I don't even know how people avoid the run. Like, if you were actively trying to avoid being on the beat, I was always amazed by people's capacity to find a place where the beat wasn't. It's like it's something to be studied in and of itself, I think. That's kind of fascinating to me. So that most people would acknowledge that black folks, black Americans have an acute sensitivity to rhythm. It's like anecdotally and it's just observable. You can see on any YouTube. You can put, like, babies on YouTube. They can't even stand, can't hold their head up. And you play music and they be like, to the beat. So, but the other part of that equation that I think people aren't as aware of, because I think it's harder to parse in a way, is an acute sensitivity to spatial arrays, like figures in space. Because people haven't figured out how to commodify it, like, in a sense. I think, like, if black people had been able to whole hog go into cinema, it would be something that you would be able to look at a screen and to just be observable, right? But you can see it in basketball, say, for example. You can see it when people talk about Pele in soccer, and he's bringing, like, they call the Jenga or something, which is really just...
Angolan.
Yeah, it's the Angolan thing. It's the capoeira thing, bringing that to play. What that is like a person moving through space, right, and being able to orient themselves, their body, in relationship to a fixed goal, and to be able to manipulate an object that's independent, a ball, and to do things with it. So, that's like in basketball, that's Julius Erving, that's Dr. J, that's Stephen Curry, that's Durant. I mean, you could see that all the time, like what that is. So the relationship between that and certain kinds of things that seem obvious to me, like as potentialities in cinema, are also a place that I'm very kind of interested in exploring. I think it's a space that our cultural predispositions and the other things, mutant things that shaped us, oppression, all these other kinds of things, come to bear and could have some real impact there.
Well, yesterday too, you were just talking about how, silent films made with hand crank cameras.
Oh, yeah.
But you said that if black folks had been given the opportunity to enter into cinema when hand crank cameras were still the norm, that when kind of locked frame cameras came in, that they probably still would have held on to.
Yeah, I think they would have. Yeah. I mean, I think I was just basically.
The hand crank model.
Yeah, I was saying that the other day that because I was explaining, I was responding to RA's question about rhythm and stuff in cinema, and I was saying like the way that cinema is normally taught, the historiography of it, which has very little to do with actually looking at the things. It's like they told you how you're supposed to look at the things. And one thing that if you go to a film course, they'll say about silent film is that, the reason they were so visual is because they didn't have sound. And that's what they kind of say. They had to be more visual because they didn't have sound. And what they mostly mean there is that they didn't have dialogue.
Right.
They didn't have dialogue. It wasn't dialogue driven. And, but first of all, there was no silent, like we look at the silent movie now, there was no silent films without music. They always had musical accompaniment. You couldn't go see a movie and there wasn't somebody playing along with it. So they always had musical accompaniment.
Ragtime.
But the way that, and ragtime in particular is the music. So I even think that's, I was saying that's something I think that's worth exploring. How come ragtime became the dominant musical accompaniment to silent film?
This new art form,
Yeah, exactly. It's like black people kind of pushing up in it, even when they weren't allowed to participate. But what I was saying, the thing I was getting at, it was like on a technical level, like what's happening in silent films and why silent films are mostly mesmerizing because they use irregular exposure intervals. And all that means is that basically, if you go to see a movie now, the way the camera is set up, it functions metronomically. It exposes the images on a regular pulse. Even if it's slow motion, it's still a regular pulse. Even if you shoot at 48 frames per second, the space between each of those exposures is even. And that's a kind of equivalent of the diatonic scale in music. It's balanced. It's a balanced scale, right? Whereas in hand crank cameras, just by necessity, when you crank a thing, it's not going to be regular. It's going to have. So if you put like a D.W. Griffith film down on a board or something, you look at it, you can actually see that the space in between each of those exposures is different. Mm-hmm. So they knew that it was it had certain expressive possibilities. So like Billy Bitzer, who was D.W. Griffith's cameraman, his nickname was the Iron Horse because he was known for being able to keep a regular crank. That was his whole thing. And that's a certain cultural logic. Like, keep the shit as regular, as metronomic as possible. He's famous for whistling La Marseillaise while he cranked. It's like da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da to keep his pulse, right? But then on the other hand, if you look at Charlie Chaplin's cameraman, like Rolly Tartaroth, it's in the notes. You can see it's all there. The way Chaplin moves on the film is completely bound up with his cameraman over and under cranking the film, like at different moments.
They had a system.
They had a system. And like there's this incredible documentary that had 9 parts called The Unknown Chaplin. And it shows, because they got all the outtakes and everything, it showed like some like Gold Rush movie. He basically improvised those films. He would have an idea and he would just shoot it over and over. Like he was successful enough that, so like some of the classic scenes, they're like 90 takes of that scene. And what Chaplin would do is in front of the camera, he would try different things. He would try it this way, try it that way, try it that way, and he would refine it in front of the camera. And the main person that he looked to, because he couldn't see it until afterwards, was his cameraman. And so they had it worked out. So if Chaplin was making a movement where he wanted to be agitated, of course, he would undercrank. So if your projection constant is 24 frames per second, and you crank under that and you play it back, it's going to, like anybody who's seen it in a home movie, it looks jittery, right? And if you overcrank, it looked slowed down. So Chaplin's movement in cinema had this combination of acceleration and, you know, undertowed fluidity and
Syncopation.
stuff. Syncopation, basically, is what it is. So, but the only reason people think that hand crank cameras, people were cranking those cameras, oh, I'm so tired of cranking these cameras. And then somebody came up with a camera with, you know, you could push a button and it would run, and they were so happy to put them shits aside. And that's not how it happened. It was like it took over 20 years from the early 18s to the 30s for basically the motorized camera to displace the hand crank camera. They had motorized cameras way, way, way earlier. It was just there was too much artistry that had been built into hand crank cameras, and the only reason it ever happened was when sound came in, the engineers took over, and they said in order to achieve perfect sync, right, the cameras have to be driven by machines so that they'll be metronomic, and the sync would be perfect, right? That's the only reason hand crank cameras were moved out, right? But as I said yesterday, as we know, nobody really cares about sync. You know that from Kung Fu movies. Don't nobody care about sync, whether somebody's lips are in perfect sync with what they're saying. And the whole history of Italian film was post-dubbed up into the 90s. I mean, Fellini's films are fluid mostly because it's all post-dubbed. You know, sync sound on a neurological level, it flattens images in a certain kind of way.
Yeah, the camera wasn't slave to the boom operator.
Exactly, totally. That's why even when the whole first motorized cameras came in, because they were loud, for one thing, you can see the pictures of them. They have a camera, and there'd be like a room built around the camera to insulate the sound. And all of a sudden, cinema went from like super fluid visual to all of a sudden all the moves of people sitting around a coffee table having a conversation because they put the mic in the flower pot. You know, so, but I just think black people, like we always do, like really resisted that, even though it would have been kind of like illogical. Like my favorite film by Oscar Micheaux is a film called 10 Minutes to Live, right? And what's interesting about that film, he shot it when silent films were, you know, still the norm. But in between him shooting it and editing it, sound came in. So he post-dubbed, all the sound is post-dubbed, you know what I mean? And a lot of the tension and the beauty and the torque of the film, I think, has to do with that. Because you see later in his films also some of the same things happening as sound started to dictate the images.
Yeah, the system.
Yeah, it got a little bit more static compared to those films. You know? So.
Yeah. Well, why we
Can we go? We can try something?
Yeah. But we can, we'll show this and then we'll open it up to you guys if you have questions.
Yeah, I'm gonna play okay, let's just see. Okay, that file, in their defense, that file may be corrupted now. I have come to that conclusion, that it may be corrupted. So let me see, I'm gonna try this one. Let's just see what happens here.
All right.
Got to come up with the volume.
title of that?
That's called Cassowary. The folks are actually talking, but yeah. So anyway, but you got a sense of the vibe of it, I guess.
Yeah. So we want to open up the floor.
We have a mic right here. If you have any questions, please come over here, stand in line. Right back here. Thank you. For the first video you showed, Arthur,
Yeah,
who is the artist who did the music for that?
that was Apex. Yeah,
Yeah, it was Apex, yeah.
Robert Hood. That was Robert Hood, who's obviously a Detroit native, genius. You know, worked with Jeff Mills. They have a history. They were in what was it, Rings of Saturn? I think they had a duo early on, Rings of Saturn. I think they both had a relationship with Underground Resistance as well. So
Yeah, I'm not sure.
he lives in Alabama now.
Preacher.
A preacher man. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hello,
Hey.
Hey.
my name is Marcia Philpott. I'm also known as Marcia Music. I'm a writer here. I met you briefly at the reception for you, Mr. Jafa, earlier this week, yesterday, I think. And I expressed my thanks to you for the gathering of these images. I feel very, very moved seeing those images. And I thank you so much for your all-encompassing of our experience. Without the judgment that is often rendered by the petty bourgeois intellectuals and the classist type of elimination of personhood for those black people who do not fit within the confines of acceptability for larger society. So I thank you so much for all of those images. That's just by way of a statement. I enjoyed your whole presentation, and Mr. Tate as well. It is a pleasure to see you in person. I would like to know a very crass kind of thing. To what do you attribute the snafu that surrounded the Oscar in the mix-up in the Oscar handout for the movie what's the name of that movie? Moonlighting,
yeah.
And the other movie. That's just a plain kind of question. I'm just curious about what you think about that. That's it for the moment. Thank you.
Want me to answer?
I was going to say the March moment at the Oscars. Right?
I mean, you know, I saw it like everybody else, so I don't know. I don't know why it went down the way it went down. I guess my takeaway from it, in a sense, was like I was both happy that Moonlighting won, because I do think there's some real black cinema in Moonlighting. Like, I think a lot of films that black people make, I don't think there's very much black cinema in them. I don't think just because you're black and you make a movie that is black cinema. Leontine Price, Jesse Norman, they're great at what they do. Genius, maybe even at what they do. But it's opera. It's not black music. I mean, even if they're singing it by Egyptians, it's still not black music. You know, it's like that musical form. That's a great musical form, opera. But it evolved in response to a set of existential and cultural desires, you know, pressure to express certain things. It evolved to do that well, and it does that well, and that's why it's great. But it's very different from, like, if you hear Leontine Price, even though she may be individually excellent, it's very different from Aretha Franklin or, you know, any number of other people, where you get both their individual genius, but you get the fact that that form that they're working inside of evolved in response to the circumstances that black people found themselves in and they were attempting to express. So I was happy for Moonlight for that reason, because I do think there's a lot of movies that come out with black directors that I wouldn't personally classify as black cinema.
Well, elaborate. Elaborate.
Well, I ain't trying to get in no trouble.
No. I'm saying elaborate in reference to Moonlighting. Like, what is the black cinema in there?
It's like
you?
the vibe. It's just the vibe of the film. It's like the way, it's the presence, the way the bodies occupy space, the way the structure is put together. I'm not a big fan of the end of the film. Like, as people have said, I'm like super critical of the way the film ended. I think it was very chicken shit, the way it ended. It's like, you try things, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work, but I really have a hard time with things where people don't try. Like, I don't think you can build a whole movie about a guy who basically is struggling with his sexuality, and you come to the culmination of the movie where he basically finally says to this other brother in this room, who he's had a long-standing thing with, he says to him, I have nobody's touched me since you touched me. I don't know, it's hard to tell in the movie whether it was 10 years earlier or what, but whatever. Nobody's touched me. And he's standing on one side of the room, the other brother's standing on the other side of the room, and then they jump cut or dissolve to them sitting on the couch. That to me is a little like if you saw Star Wars, what is it, Return of the Jedi? I forget whichever one. The one when Luke Skywalker finds out that Darth Vader is his dad. If the whole movie builds to that, and Luke has he has a lightsaber, and Darth Vader has a lightsaber, and they're standing on different sides of the room, and you cross this off to Luke flying away in the Millennium Falcon, like, people will fucking go crazy. Like, what the hell was that? You know? So to me, like, it's like that. You can't build the whole movie to a cat who's trying to negotiate his sexuality without showing me how he got across the room to the other guy. You cannot crossfade. That's chicken shit. But having said that, I really enjoyed the movie because the vibe of it, the vibe and the flow of it was really beautiful. I mean, I think it was beautiful, no accident. I know, like, for sure, like, we know that what they looked at. And they looked at things that my associates and our circle of people were doing. They studied these things and said, how can we do that? So it's not an accident. And I appreciate that they did a good job of it. I just didn't like the end. So to get back to originally the Oscar question, so I was glad that they won. That was one takeaway. The other takeaway is I thought the producers of La La Land were incredibly graceful. Like for real, super graceful. I don't think very many people would have managed it with as much grace as they did. But beyond that, I don't know. I think I get it on the structure level why the Academy Awards matter. But but they didn't nominate Killer Sheep. They didn't nominate Daughters of the Dust. They didn't nominate Guns and Hiss. They didn't nominate. It's like they didn't nominate any of our masterpieces. So why would I even? I don't. At the end of the day, I don't really care what they think. So one way or the other, I don't. Whatever.
Hi, thank you for I really enjoyed this conversation. And the last time I saw the two of you in this kind of forum was at Duke University, where I was a grad student many moons ago. So it's nice.
Where's sister?
Duke
Oh,
University.
Duke.
Oh, yeah.
At the National Museum, yeah. So I had a question about television as a medium, because you mentioned earlier in the talk about the golden age of film, and there are many references to this era of television, the medium of television as the golden era of TV. And so I wanted to know your take on, there seems to be an increase in the different narratives of the Black experience being conveyed on television, as well as opportunities online, like on YouTube. Issa Rae, for example, started on YouTube. So I just wanted to know your take on that as an alternative to the medium of film.
Did you take it, brother?
You want me to take it? I'm not sure television is a medium, like in the sense of Marshall McLuhan talking about being a medium. We're just talking about media at this point, the platform. There's so many different platforms where people receive cinema. I mean, a large part of what people see on television are movies. It's like Netflix, the majority of it is movies. But I know what she's speaking to. Yeah. She's speaking to how television shows seem to have, all of a sudden with things like Atlanta or Insecure, it almost seems like you got a richer, more complex series of characters than you see in movies. And that's just more evidence of what I was saying, or how Hollywood, and when I say Hollywood, I mean Hollywood movies, are kind of dead, because in a way, the economics of how they make decisions about what's going to get made and what's not getting made really don't allow for nuance and things like that. That's just all superheroes and stuff like that, or horror films, I guess, at this point. Now, I guess we're going to see a wave of films since it did so well, horror films, but don't get me wrong, I don't have a problem with horror films.
Well, let me ask you this, though. Do you think non-theatrical exhibition of visual storytelling is cinema, or is cinema something else that maybe has a definition that's tied up with
with the movie theater experience?
In the movie theater, yeah, and that it's that our definition of cinema is archaic, maybe at this point in time.
I think everything you just said was right. I agree with that. I think that cinema is a very specific thing. Mm-hmm. I think that, in terms of just the history of audio-visual art, let's say, with moving images and sound. Mm-hmm. It's come through cinema, but it's come through all kinds of other things that aren't cinema, like, looking at basketball games, like Monday Night Football, where they go to slow motion and all these kinds of things. That's not cinema, mm-hmm. but I still think in some ways it's interesting audio-visual phenomena, So I don't really, me, I don't care about what platform I saw it on. Mm-hmm. I like YouTube. I think YouTube is so much more interesting than almost anything on TV in terms of Black folks. I think Atlanta's fresh, super, super fresh. a lot of why it's fresh is because I think they really are like tap into why YouTube is interesting. It's really just by access, like who gets access and who gets to tell the story. Like Donald Glover, right? Yeah, he took a particular route, like in the sense he started in parks and recreation. Like that brother is so
community,
yeah, community,
right,
yeah.
right,
You know, he's come up through the Hollywood ranks and been able to retain his desire to create certain kinds of representation, and he was able to accrue enough power, not on NBC or ABC, but on, you know, like it's on FX, I think.
Yeah,
It's like on FX, which is like FX is not, you know what I mean? It's like these new platforms, these new spaces where things get greenlit. So he was able to accrue enough power, and I think the price point, what he was able to do, the fact that they didn't have no movie stars and all this kind of stuff, the economics of it said, hey, let's take a chance on this guy, and it was a big, big hit, and it surprised everybody. But I remember seeing the trailers, like for 6 months before, I was sitting in a trailer, which I saw on YouTube. They're incredible. These trailers, it's like they took the Far Side video.
Right.
It was a genius video.
Pass me by.
They took the video where they filmed everybody moving backwards and they played it in forward. So it made all the movement strange. In the trailers, they did that. In these two trailers, they're masterpiece TV trailers, like really. And if I had any critique of Atlanta, it's not really a critique. It's like a desire. I hope they are able to bring to bear some of that they did in the trailers in the actual series. You know, but I know a lot of that's economic.
Visual play.
Yeah, visual play. Yeah, I wish they, but having said that, I think it's better than any black movie in the last 10 years. The series is way better. In terms of the nuance, the complexity of the characters, the fact that they move like living entities, they don't feel overdetermined, and how they move here or there. But yeah, I think Atlanta is dope. I even think Insecure is not that bad. I think it got better. I hated it in the beginning, the first couple of episodes. I thought like this pales compared to Awkward Black Girl, you know, which is where she kind of came from. And then it seemed like when they stopped trying to be funny in a way and just got on with telling the story, it got better. And it was really clear that Molly was more interesting than Issa, like more interesting. So it sort of started to take its own shape. You know, it's funny, I was talking to some people the other day about Jeffrey Wright, who was the greatest black actor of his generation, I think, male actor of his generation. But like if you look at his output, his most genius work is all in theater. Everybody knows that. Right. Like he just didn't, what he was capable of, you just didn't get to see it in the movies. Like if you ask a lot of folks, like what's his best performance, they'll say Shaft, where he played a Dominican drug lord, and it's like a little, it's not even a big part. It's a little part, but it was so amazing. He told me when he walked down
he's a beast in there.
He's a beast in that character.
Yeah.
Like you wanted to say Richard Roundtree and all the rest of y'all just go home and let's just stick with this person right here. I want to know who that person is. That's how powerful his character was, right? The character. He told me when he walks down 125th Street now, people yell out the name of the character. That's how you know it really struck a chord. Like it really struck a chord. So Insecure is like that. I mean, you know what I mean? It's like what's dope and what they decide is dope are not the same things. Like for example, my brother Andre Holland in the Nick. Anybody who saw the Nick, which is great TV. The first year, out of the blue, it was supposed to be by Clyde Owens. Andre rocked that shit as the black surgeon for Paris. It was like, it turned into the Andre Holland show. But during the off season, they fixed that shit. They fixed it. Next year you came back, he couldn't see, he was blind, and he sat in the room for the whole season, seemed like. They were like, we're not gonna have that repeat itself. It's not supposed to be an Andre Holland show. So it's the same thing like Kato. They shut the shit down rather than just let it turn into what it should have been, the Kato show. You know, so anyway.
Yeah.
Hey, first of all, I want to thank you both for the conversation. I've seen you talk a number of times now, and it's always illuminating. AJ, I wanted to ask you about the medium for which Love is the Message is Death was made, within the context of you just saying that YouTube is one of your favorite platforms, and hearing you previously say that you are kind of an accidental art gallery person. You know, so when you were making it, when you were first cutting it together, putting it together with the music, where did you think you would leave it for people to see?
YouTube. YouTube, just straight up. All my friends urged me not to put it on YouTube. That's the only reason it didn't end up on YouTube. Because everybody I knew was saying, don't put it on YouTube, don't put it on YouTube, just hang on to it. And one of the main people who was vociferously saying, don't put it on YouTube was Khalil Joseph, who did the Flying Lotus videos and stuff. Khalil was at Art Basel, not this past year, the year before. He had a screening, he took it, unbeknownst to me. He took it himself, because he was a little obsessed with it. And I think that's all right to say he was a little obsessed with it. He liked it a lot. He took it with him. And so when he had a screening of his work, he started it off with Love is the Message. And that's how Gavin Brown, my dealer, actually saw it in Switzerland and got in touch with me. So I was sort of stumbled into kind of an art career in a sense. I didn't even know, I don't know what you call it. Is that generosity? It's something beyond generosity. You know, he was advocating, I guess, for me. But I hadn't really envisioned it in the, you know, in the art context or anything. It's sort of changed my life, you know, the last 10 months, because not only that, I since had a show at the Serpentine, which Love is the Message wasn't a part of. I've since shown Apex at Art Basel, where it was a really, really big success. And, you know, I'm a sort of art world something now, I don't know. But, and as a consequence, like I said something the other night, that it was the kind of provocation, but I think it's true. I was just looking at a thing, I was thinking about Jay-Z, and thinking about, not Rock Nation.
Oh, Reasonable Doubt?
No, Rockefeller, like in Reasonable Doubt. And I just said that one of the reasons that Jay-Z got to the place that he got to beyond, like, you know, Talent or Drive or something like that, is because he made his money in a whole different other sphere than he was operating in artistically. So when he came to do his first record, he was already a rich guy from the drug game, right? And they had made no apologies about that. So they didn't have to take no shit deal in the beginning. Like, people were trying to sign them to different contracts and stuff, and they was like, no, him and Dame Dash, they were like, we don't need your money, you know, if you're not gonna actually give us access to your platform, your distribution platform in the way that we want, and give us a deal that we can accept, we're not gonna take it. So Reasonable Doubt, they did that themselves. That was independently released. Even the video, which was it the video was called Reasonable Doubt? Or it was just like Streets
of Watching,
yeah, Streets of Watching, exactly.
Compilation of videos.
Yeah, even the video they did themselves. So I said to somebody, I'm trying to
after
treat,
being
I'm
rejected by Def Jam and everybody else.
Yeah, totally. Everybody didn't, you know, I told somebody I'm treating the art game as my drug game, you know. It's like, it's the drug game for me. It's like, I make some money over here. Now I'm starting to talk to Hollywood again. People want to have conversations with me, but I don't have to take a shit deal. I'm not going to do anything if it's not going to allow me to have Final Cut and do what I want to do, because I know that therein lies disaster. You know, you try, like I like to say, black folks never get to be the Wright brothers, right? We never get to build some, throw it off the cliff, and the shit glides a little bit, and people say, wow, look at the implications of that. That thing didn't just go down like a rock, it went a little bit. Maybe we invest in them, it could go even further, right? We always are the wrong brothers and sisters, right? We never are given the benefit of the doubt. So like, even for me, Love is the Message, I was just saw it as a demo, like, because I think I would stand up and say, you could make black cinema like the music, that does what the music does, and it was like just, you know, it was like a proof of concept. I hadn't envisioned people were gonna like react to it the way that they did. So, but I still feel like it's like with Daughters. I've been through this as a co-producer of Daughters. They tell you there's no audience for your film, there's no commercial possibility for it. A film about black women, you know, at the turn of the century, dresses and South Carolina, who wants to see that? Right? Nobody wants to see that. People told us that year after year after year after year. And when we made the film, and it was a hit, and it was a hit, like it made a lot of people rich. It didn't make us rich, but it made some people rich. And it demonstrated that there was a market for that particular vision. And people said it was a fluke. They said it was a fluke. So it put you right back to square one again. Like, you got to mortgage your house, ruin your credit, all this, try to do it again. You just can't do it but so many times, you know. So that's what I mean by we're always the wrong brothers and sisters. We're never given the benefit of doubt of what we do. I feel very blessed now, because again, like, I'm going to keep doing what I do, you know, and when I get the right situation for a feature film, I'm going to do that. But I want to do it, you know, with a certain kind of force. It may not be a hit, but a lot of great things are not hits, you know. Raging Bull, that's clearly Scorsese's best film. It was an out-and-out flop. So I can't guarantee it's going to be a hit, but it's going to be a thing. Let me tell you, it's going to be a thing. So,
Cool. So we'll take one more question. This one.
oh, he had
Thanks for speaking here today, and also thanks for giving us a peek at your iTunes selection there. I saw Love is the Message on Thursday, and I wanted to ask, with that and like the 444, with these kind of disruptive breaks that you put in your work, or the more recent work, you know, is that kind of speaking to attention deficit of, you know, culture today, or is it a jazz thing? Is it a Dadaist thing? Could you speak to that?
probably a little of both, honestly, but I'm not doing it because I attention deficit. I mean, I hear that. That's real. So it's probably a little of that. But it's more just in the tradition of the break, you know, in music, in black music. It's just the break. Huh?
You mean in terms of the audience, I guess.
You mean in terms of audience? You know, again, I didn't make it for an audience. I didn't make it for a specific audience. I just made the thing that I was trying to make. I was just trying to embody something. I made it, and then after I made it, I looked at it and said, hey, this is interesting. I want to share it with people. I felt very compelled to share it with people because it seemed, in hindsight, you know, after I had actually put it together, that it was my attempt to, you know, struggle with this wave of evidence, video evidence of what black people have been saying since time immemorial, that people don't treat us nice, you know what I mean? And that when we say it, they say we're tripping or something. Like in the 80s, it was all Eleanor Bumpers. There's a whole series of cases of disputing accounts of violence enacted on black people, and all of a sudden we got Rodney King. It was really just because of the video that it became a thing, because it was there for everybody to see, you know? And just because of, I mean, I told Greg, I remember the first time somebody told me they're gonna put a movie camera in a cell phone. I thought that was the dumbest idea. I was like, this is the dumbest idea I've ever heard, you know? But I could never have anticipated how it was gonna empower people to actually just document the everyday going on of this structure and this system and stuff. And so, like, you know, from Trayvon Martin on, I was starting to see, you know, it was something like there was some critical mass got reached in terms of people having iPhones or video phones in their hands, and the platforms being available to people, whether it be YouTube or World Star Hip Hop or whatever. It reached or Facebook, it reached a critical mass where people became comfortable with not only shooting these things, but posting these things. And like everybody else, I was just enthralled or transfixed or horrified by the wave of things, the confirmation of what we already knew to be true, because, you know, there's a kind of necessary compartmentalization that you have to be practiced at as a black person to get anything done, or you'll never go out the door of your house. So that compartmentalization got cracked by this visual, this wave, tsunami of evidence of what was happening to black folks, and that was just in some ways my way of processing it. And it's funny because, you know, I mean, not to be all dramatic or anything, but, you know, I grew up in Mississippi. It's a strange place to grow up. It's a violent place in a lot of ways. The Delta, you know, economic deprivation, it creates that. So I grew up around a lot of kind of aberrant kind of behavior, you know, and stuff. And so I've seen a lot of crazy shit, you know. And so I wasn't really that tripped out by images of black men mostly being killed. It's like, it's been a given most of my life. It was the video of the sister backing out of the car with her hands up and, you know, and just saying, like, at a certain point, I guess she realized they weren't gonna kill her kids. Or it was unlikely they were gonna shoot her kids. But she was in that space of like, y'all are terrorizing my kids. She was worrying about the psychic well-being of her kids. And that just broke me. I just remember sobbing when I saw it on Facebook. It really broke me. It was like, I was like, and I remember thinking like, why are you crying at this? You've been looking at all these videos of people being murdered, and nobody's being murdered here. But it was just, I don't know, I was just like, I mean, I don't think I'm a naive person, but it just really fucked me up, you know? So I think Love is the Message was compiled unconsciously in some response to that, or maybe.
Okay. Well, thank you all.
Thanks for coming.
Your patience and sitting.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming.
All right. And thank you, MOCAD. Thank you, Monty.